Straight talk from Israel. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
Today, we'll be doing a tribute to Shifra Hoffman, one of my former weekly guests that we had here on the Tamar Yonah show. But quickly, just to mention the big news of Monday morning here in Israel, the debate after Yamina leader Naftali Bennett says he will join with Yair Lapid and the left wing to form a new government here in Israel. Monday's headlines, quote, one of the biggest election thefts we've seen. Journalist Kalman Libskin criticizes Yamina's decision to form a government with the left wing and Arab parties. And another headline, for the first time, there will be a post-Zionist government in Israel, calling on the Yamina party not to form a government with the left-wing parties and Ra'am, which again are the Arabs. The question remains, will Netanyahu pull a rabbit out of his hat again, either by wooing over Ayelet Shaked from Yamina and others to join with him and the right wing, which is Yamina's home. By the way, Yamina means right, R-I-G-H-T. It means right in Hebrew. So how could he be sitting with the left and forming a left-wing government now? A lot of people even are calling it treason or treacherous, treasonous. Well, Bibi could just throw a wrench in the wheel of the left and prevent them from forming a government if he can woo over some people. And he doesn't have to win. Bibi does not have to succeed in making a coalition himself. All he needs to do is prevent the left from making a government, and then we would probably go to new elections or fifth elections inside of less than 3 years. Or the left can form a government, but it may not last even a month. They're unnatural bed partners. We're going to have to wait and see what will happen. In the meantime, we will be making a tribute to Shifra Hoffman today. May her memory be for a blessing, and have her story told to us by her friends. We're going to be right back, everybody. Don't go anywhere.
How did a nice Jewish girl from Delaware end up living in Israel? Shalom, I'm Natalie Sapinski. Join me on my show, Returning Home. Meet different people who have moved to Israel. Hear their personal stories, their highs, their lows, and everything in between. Each week, we talk to experts on immigration and the process of moving to Israel. Listen to Returning Home every Thursday, only on Israel News Talk Radio.
All right, we are back here at the Tamar Yonah Show on IsraelNewsTalkRadio.com, and we're doing a tribute to Shifra Hoffman. May her memory be for a blessing. And we're going to have her story told to us by her friends today on the show. We're going to start off with a friend of hers called Sandy. Sandy was not only a friend, but she was one of the caretakers for Shifra. And she's going to be joining us on the show now to tell us exactly what has transpired, because so many people have asked been writing me, Tamar, what happened exactly? So to get the story straight from her caretaker, we have joining us Sandy. Shalom, Sandy.
Everybody. Yeah, I knew Shifra for already about 7 years. I knew of Shifra growing up, of course, when I went to high school in Yeshiva of Queens in New York. I used to run home every Thursday to read the Jewish Press, like many other people used to do.
The Jewish Press is a newspaper that's from New York, yes.
Right. And Shifra had a column in there. Of course, there were many columns, but I used to always kind of, I used to roam to Shifra's column. She was like a very activist woman and always talked about Israel, which I loved. Our whole family, we were a Zionistic family. And I used to always zoom into her article and see what was the latest thing that she'd write about Israel. So she was, as a young girl, I looked up to her sort of like she was this dynamic personality who I could maybe, I looked at her almost as a mentor. And I used to follow her column every week, and also with Rabbi Kahani's column. And I always thought, one day, I would love to meet this woman. She's so unbelievable. She travels here. She traveled all across the U.S. and lectured. And I said, I hope one day I'll meet her. Well, 7 years ago, unfortunately, I met her in not such a happy way. A neighbor told me there's an American woman in this neighborhood, in Shmuel Hanavi neighborhood, that is sitting Shiva for her son, Barry, Alav Shalom. And I thought, American lady in Shmuel Hanavi, which is a very prominent, dominated Sephardi community. I went in there, and then this little lady said, what's her name? Shifra Hoffman. And I'm like, what? This little, lady with dark wig on, that's Shifra Hoffman. I was like, I wanted to say wow, and this and that, but it was the Shiva. So I told her, we have to talk. And our eyes locked, I told her, I know you. My gosh, I was wanting to meet you. And our eyes locked. I just felt so at home with her. And I said, I've got to come back. I did come back, I think, the following Shabbat. And we started talking. And then from then on, it was it. I just said, you are going to be like my aunt. I kind of adopted her. She loved me. I loved her. And I used to come over frequently. And then as her, I know a thing or two about computers. And she told me, I could use some help, with my, I have victims of Arab terror fund, that. I could use some help. Could you sometimes help me with the organization? Of course, I told her I would help her. I'd do anything. By the way, what she does, what she was telling me, her things that she does. I said, for sure, I'd help you. So I came back, and then we had just ongoing relationship. That's it. We were, I was always at her house. I visited her on Shabbat. Later on, however, little by little, she suffered from, I think it was some kind of a cellulitis in her legs. She had poor circulation.
Cellulitis.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. I remember she was saying that her legs were not healing, the sores, or she had...
Right. She stood a lot. She was praying a lot. And her health deteriorated little by little. First it was the legs, and then she had heart failure, basically. And that's what she suffered from. So little by little, her circulation went. She still was very... energized, to go, let's say, to the Kotel on Rosh Chodesh. That was her thing. She had to go to the Kotel. And I remember one time, I actually stayed with her for a while when I was in between living arrangements. And this is a funny one. She told me, I have to go to the Kotel, it's Rosh Chodesh. And it was late. Shifra was a nighttime person. I went to bed early. That was her night was her day. She always used to tell everyone, I'm starting my day at night, and Sandra's getting up in the morning, and I go to bed.
Right.
It was a funny joke between us. So Shifra goes out to the Kotel. It's about 8 o'clock or 7 or 8 o'clock at night. And I was telling her, I don't think it's a good idea, and I couldn't go with her for whatever reason. And she says, no, I want to go. Well, it was around midnight, and she hadn't come back yet. And here's this old lady in her 80s, and she hadn't come back from the Kotel. She wasn't answering her phone. So I started to worry, and and the opposite. It's just I'm the mother waiting
right.
for the kid to come, and I was really waiting for the 80-something-year-old lady to come home from the Kotel, and I was so worried. I think I called the police even, and she finally came home with a big smile on her face, and she said, "Oh, you can't believe it! I saw some Chayalim were being
Chayalim are soldiers." Let me just translate some of these terms. The Kotel is the Western Wall. Mm-hmm. And Chayalim are soldiers, the IDF. Go ahead. Right.
So she was saying, I was present to see these young soldiers being inaugurated, and her face lit up. She was so happy, and she said, and these nice Chayil had helped me with my wagon. And She was like she was hilarious. She was like she had a young heart. Even though she suffered from heart failure, but she was young at heart. She seemed to me like a teenager, the way she acted, you know what I mean?
So for those who remember when I would introduce Shifra on the show, she was the founder of Victims of Arab Terror and the director of Shuva, which means return, and it was to encourage the Jews to make Aliyah to come and move to Israel. She helped the terror victims, and they used to come to her house also. I remember I was also at the Shiva when she sat Shiva for her husband. At the 7 days of mourning, and I remember she was introducing me to some of the women there that were victims of Arab terror that she was helping. You want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so she would help them out monthly, like before the holidays. And they would come around and they would like do things for her. They loved her. I mean, they doted over her. They made her cakes and things, and if she had to go somewhere, they would accompany her. And help her out. And we did a little fundraising for that. She told me, it's Hanukkah or it's before Pesach. We have to do fundraising. And then we'd sit at the computer and she would tell me like wording, what to write, to get people's awareness to her organization. She loved it. She was so proud of that organization. And it really helped the ladies. And the ladies really had they enjoyed a nice relationship with Shifra, who they looked up to as a mentor. And they love her. They all came to her funeral, of course, and it's just an ongoing thing with them. They would do anything. One lady said, "You could move in with me, Shifra. I'll take care of you." How much they love her.
I have to tell everybody that Shifra. I hope I don't start to lose it on the air here, but she was such a fighter, such a hero for Israel, and yet she was not afraid to say anything. She told the truth, whether you liked it or didn't like it, whether it was popular or unpopular. She stuck to the truth. She was bold and unafraid, and yet she lived so humbly. She didn't even own her own apartment. She was renting a very tiny, I guess it was like a 2-room apartment. You could barely turn around in it. So humbly. I mean, God must be giving her a palace in the next world. Not that anybody has arms and legs and needs a palace, a physical thing there. But
not only that,
the expression.
Tamar, never took Tamar. Not only that, but she didn't take a shekel for herself. Her little office. Her little tiny bedroom that she coined as an office was like a secondhand piece of wood with a computer on it. And she always tells me, I don't take a shekel for myself. Everything was just totally for the organization.
And can you tell us, did she ever say anything about her weekly spots here on the radio at Israel News Talk Radio?
Tamar, she lived for that program. That was her biggest joy in the last few years. I mean, because of her debilitating sickness, she couldn't go out anymore. It was very sad. She couldn't leave the house. And she looked so forward to your show. And she would tell me, like, Thursday night or, whatever, Sunday morning. Okay, tell Tamar that I want to talk on the show. Tell her, you would ask what she talked about, and she would tell me, write to Tamar and tell her this and that. She looked so forward to reaching out. She loved speaking in the public. And she loved getting out her message, which was usually telling the Jews from America to move to Israel. That was her big message.
To have Jews make Aliyah and move to Israel.
To make Aliyah.
And I know that she loved it when the listeners would write her or call her. She really loved that interaction as well.
Right.
Tell us about
always
that.
Had me look on chat room. What did they say about? What was the comment? And many people, like even just recently, a woman, Shifra was already very sick at home, and one woman who lives in the neighborhood listened to her show and actually became a good friend of hers. She started coming every Shabbat. Her name's Yehudit, and she would come with cakes and magazines, and she would read from Rabbi Kahani's brother. She had like a book about the Parsha, and Shifra enjoyed her visit so much, just from recently, the last month or so.
Sandy, in the last 30 seconds that we have before we go, at her funeral, Jonathan Pollard spoke, and Itamar Ben-Gvir, who's in the Knesset, a Knesset member, spoke at her funeral. In 30 seconds, what can you tell us?
Well, I know that Jonathan Pollard, whom she loved, him and Esther, she was the matchmaker between them, and they were so dear to her. And she was so happy, I can't even tell you in words, when she heard that they were landed in Israel. We like drank a l'chaim, and she was just so happy. And they said, and they were telling everyone how Shifra made the match somehow.
All right. We're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much, Sandy, for coming on. God bless you.
All right, you too. Take care.
Thank you for coming on. There's more about Shifra when we get back. Don't go anywhere.
Shalom, everybody. Making a difference often takes just one moment and one person at a time. I am Orly Benny Davis, your show host on Israel News Talk Radios from Jerusalem with Love. You'll be hearing people talking about politics, religion, social issues, and making a better tomorrow. Join me, Orly Benny Davis, for God and Country. From Jerusalem with Love.
Wednesdays on Israel News Talk Radio.
All right, you're listening to the Tamar Yonah Show here at IsraelNewsTalkRadio.com, and this is a tribute to Shifra Hoffman, a former weekly guest on my show. May Shifra Hoffman, may her memory be for a blessing, is still with us. Her words are still with us. Her boldness and lack of fear of the nations, or what people say, as long as she tells the truth and she sticks by that. This was the type of person she was. And yet, even though she was so strong and such a leader in her work, she lived so modestly. And again, as I said, she was the founder of Victims of Arab Terror, and she was the director of Shuva, which was to return, encouraging Jews to make Aliyah and to come home to Israel. We're speaking with her friends today, and I just want to mention, before we bring on her next friend, I'm getting messages from people. What exactly happened? How did this happen? Tell us about her. And I even got a message from someone named Ron Weissman, who, if you've been listening to my show over the years, you've known that Shifra's been working on a book, and he says that he's been helping Shifra with her book for 5 years now. And last week, he writes me, we finally finished it, and she was happy with it and said, okay, let's order some copies. A few days later, he writes, she left us. Please send this to her listeners, as I'm sure she would want them to have a copy. You can read it online or order a print copy. Any funds raised from the book will go to her organization, VAT, which is Victims of Arab Terror, or ZERO, Zionist Emergency Rescue Operation. And so anybody who wants to get a copy of her book can email me, and we'll go from there. All right, Karen Dubb is our next guest. She was born into Jewish activism. Her father fled Germany following Kristallnacht at the age of 17 years old. He boarded a boat for Holland with his two younger brothers to escape Germany. After later moving to the United States and witnessing pockets of anti-Semitism and threats and attacks on Jews there, he joined up with Rabbi Meir Kahana, Zichrono Livracha, may his memory be for a blessing, and became one of the founders of the JDL, or the Jewish Defense League. In Karen's teenage years, she grew up knowing Shifra, the, quote, mother of Jewish activism, fighting for the freedom of Jews trapped and captive in the then Soviet Union. Karen proudly knew Shifra Hoffman for almost 50 years, both in the United States and in Israel, where she has lived for the past 30 years. So I'd like to welcome to the show Karen Dubb.
It's nice to be with you today, Tamar Yonah. I feel so blessed that I knew Shifra. Her presence so will prevail throughout my life. She's such a strong personality, and I have to be so thankful to HaKadosh Baruch Hu that I met her at such a young age, and she was my mentor, my teacher. I could say she's a family member because I've known her for so long, and she inspired me to be involved in activism in high school for the fight for Soviet Jewry. She was a very, very warm, loving, caring person. She cared about every Jew, and she cared about the nation of Israel. If there's one thing that I could, sum up that is so strong in my mind, is that she feared no man. She had such yirat shamayim. What a model she was. So I want to share a story that she loved to talk about in this past year when she was ill. And when I would visit her, she, of course, reminisced. And, she had, until her last day, she had this phenomenal memory.
Okay, Karen, if I could just ask you, when you use Hebrew terms, just to translate it afterwards, Yirat Shamayim, for anyone who doesn't know, means fear of heaven. That's someone who's a God-fearing person. Go ahead.
Okay. And so there was an organization formed by Rabbi Meir Kahana, and of course Shifra was his assistant, so she really worked hard on this organization, and it was called Jews Against Jesse Jackson. In 1986, Jackson, he called himself Pastor or Reverend Jackson, so he called New York Town, and he called the Jews Haimi, which was an anti-Semitic slur. He started this movement of this anti-Semitism of Jews being better or richer or whatever it was. And on this particular occasion back in 1986, so we had branches all over the United States, and Shifra Hoffman came to Providence, Rhode Island, where we lived at the time, and she spoke at a forum in a synagogue there, and she sent a press release out. So the people, Jesse Jackson's campaign, knew about her being there, and they sent out 5 of their representatives to debate her. And so in walk these 5 physical giants, and they get up there and they say, oh, we didn't mean anything by Haimi Town, and we really love the Jews, and we're really this and we're really that. And of course, it was absolute lies. So she put them into place, and when they walked out there, they were little ants. So we were so proud of her, and she loved to tell that story.
I think people need to realize also that Shifra was such a petite woman, and up against these big, tall black guys coming in. It must have been really something.
Yes, such a brave woman. Very often she organized the masses to come out in demonstrations against Oslo, against, the first, how do you say, Girush in English, the first expulsion was in Sinai. So whether she was in the States at the time, she was here for 35 years, or whether she was here, she organized demonstrations against those agreements. And even if she couldn't get a crowd, wherever she was, she would come out, even just her and her beloved husband, Ralph. And he was her biggest fan, and they were the cutest couple. She would, she told him like this, 35 years ago, she says, Ralph, we're going to join our brothers and sisters, our people, and we're making Aliyah. so he turns to his friends and he says, "Oh, I thought she meant we were going to Florida." So that was like just the cutest couple, and they always were together and demonstrating together and bringing out people together. There's another wonderful friend of Shifra's and of mine. She was a Russian dissident. Her name is Eleonora Shifrin. So Eleonora and Shifra were fighting for the freedom of Russian Jewry. Eleonora came here in the 1970s, and they became close friends. Now, Eleonora is really very much a student of Shifra, and she represents an organization in America of Russians that raise money for victims of terror and lone soldiers. So she too became active in distributing money and meeting up with lone soldiers who were not victims, who were sustained. I'm forgetting my English. Who were injured in the wars. So those two were always together when for victims of Arab terror, Russian Jewry, and I wanted to share something that Shifra would talk about all the time, and she would say, we recycle history, and the only thing that changes are the players. So she wrote in her first book, "Ask Not Why My People." Are you familiar with that book?
Yes.
So she wrote an article that's called "Israel's Image: What Will the Nation Say?" And if I could just read a small portion in what she says, because it's very apropos to what happened in the past 2 weeks.
Okay, so why don't you do that? Because we have to go to a break now. All right, and when you get back, then you won't have to be interrupted in the middle of that. Again, we are doing a tribute show for Shifra Hoffman, Zichronah Livracha, may her memory be for a blessing, who passed away almost a week ago and was a former weekly guest on our show. She was a hero of Israel, always fighting for Israel and the Jewish people. Unafraid, fearless woman, a tiny woman, but a fearless woman, an amazing woman and a heroine. We're going to be right back, everybody. Don't go anywhere.
You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
This is Shai Bentakoa, and each week I'll be webcasting to you from Judea, origin of the word Jew, a people besieged and beleaguered in every generation. Nazi Germany's but a memory, but in its place the world invented the phantom Palestinians as this generation's internationally authorized Jew killers. Tune in for a different slant on life in Israel, Phantom Nation, every Monday.
Hi, I'm Rabbi David Aaron. The soul basics are the most profound, the most essential, and yet often the most neglected in our education. Join me for Soul Talk on Israel's News Talk Radio and discover the secrets to love, spiritual growth, and personal power.
All right, we are back here at the Tamar Yonah Show on IsraelNewsTalkRadio.com, and we are having a tribute to Shifra Hoffman, who passed away just approximately a week ago, a little bit less. And Shifra, may her name be for a blessing She was a real hero of Israel, and her friends are coming forward now and talking about her and letting us know a little bit more about her background. And our guest right now is Karen Dubb, who has known Shifra for 50 years, half a century. So who better to talk about that? And Karen, you wanted to read to us something from her book, and then you wanted to talk about her funeral that she had. Please, go ahead.
Correct. So in her book, it's entitled Israel's Image. And while we think history changes, it really is the same. The players change. And this is what she wrote. As the situation in Gaza worsens and has become a flashpoint for worldwide media, a recent directive was issued by the Olmert government to launch a campaign aimed at changing Israel's image. Presumably, the rationale for this public relations effort is an attempt to win friends and influence nations. In order to stem the tide of universal condemnation leveled at Israel's retaliatory actions in Gaza, despite the government's ongoing policy of restraint, apparently the age-old curse, "What will the nation say?" is alive and well in the sovereign Jewish state. Ironically, it is the Arab enemies who have discovered this Achilles heel of the Jews. So apropos for our times. And we keep fighting these wars all over again, not to win them, but to save face. And we can't save face. So the bottom line, I think, was that Shifra always screamed out to the world, listen, we are who we are because we have Hashem, we are the Jewish people in our holy nation with our holy God, and we will prevail. And we don't care what the world thinks of us because we have our faith that God will redeem us from these difficulties, and we have to stand up to our enemies.
Yeah, I just want to insert here that, we learn in the Torah that we are a nation that dwells alone, and we don't want to be like the other nations because we are supposed to be leaders of the other nations. And if we become like them, then we can't lead. And what does it mean to lead? To bring the light of Torah to the world, of morality, of how to act and how to live our lives. The creator of all of us, whether you're Jewish or not, wants good for humanity. And the Jewish people are supposed to shine the light of Torah. And we can't do that if we're constantly bending over backwards trying to show the nations that we're just like you, like us. No, we have to be a leader and show the nations that. And we do that in some aspects of when someone's in trouble, there's an earthquake or a terrible natural disaster. Israel's always out there offering help. And we do so many things. We're leaders in medicine and in agriculture and water desalination. We are leaders and we need to act like leaders. We are a blessing to the world. But when we try to not be who we are, as Karen is saying, and trying to bend over backwards and saying, well, we're fighting defensively. Look, we're just trying to defend ourselves. No, we have to destroy the evil for the goodness of everybody. Even the non-Jews. As I said, if we went into Gaza and took out the Hamas, any remaining Arabs who helped Israel with information and who remain there, their lives would be better. So go ahead, Karen.
Yes, we have created this monster, unfortunately, because we have very weak leaders. Well, okay, so I wanted to talk a bit about the funeral. That was really something to see because Shifra's friends were far and wide. They were from every spectrum of the Jewish people and every age. And her neighbors who wept so, wow. And they were there for her, and she was always there for them. She was like everybody's mother. And Baruch Ben Yosef, who is an attorney, and he's actually my husband's partner in his law firm. So he also knows Shifra for 50 years. And he spoke beautifully about different incidents that occurred over the years that he witnessed, and that was very heartwarming. Jonathan and Esther Pollard spoke together, and that was also amazing. So this is the story. I cannot do justice to it like Esther does, but she was friendly with Shifra, and Shifra wrote beautiful articles in the Jewish press over the years, and she wrote about Jonathan Pollard's incarceration, and she headed a campaign of letter writing. So she says to Esther, she meets her for the first time, and she says, you know, this man, Jonathan Pollard, he's suffering so, but he helped Israel, the spy for Israel. She says, why don't you write to him? And she gives Esther the newspaper, and Esther goes home to Canada, and she's, forgets about it. And like a month later, she's cleaning up all her papers, and she sees the Jewish press, and she remembers this message, and she says, I'm going to write to this spy for Israel. Sounds interesting. And that's how the matchmaking program began. So very sweet.
Wow. I understand that Itamar Ben-Gvir, who's a new Knesset member, also spoke. He was the first one to speak at the funeral. Tell us about that.
So he was the first one to speak because he was rushed off. I guess he's a busy man, don't you think? In any event, he gets up and he says, I know Shifra since I'm 14 years old. Yes, Itamar started his Jewish activism at a very, very young age. And, beautiful stories of how he admired Shifra, and he went with her to different demonstrations, against Oslo, against Arab terror. And so she was certainly an inspiration for him. And many of the great, wonderful people here today on earth are students of hers. So her life was a tribute of light unto the nations, to all the peoples of the world, because she was always screaming the truth. And her love for her people, her love for her land, her love for our God was just beyond words.
Karen, in the last 3 minutes of the show that we have, what do you think that Shifra would have wanted all of us to learn and to continue doing, and also for you just to say a last word about her that you want everybody to know?
I think that she would want everybody to fight for the truth. And every visit that I had with her, she'd ask me, what's really going on? What's happening? And we talk about, I don't know if I could call it politics because it's a dirty word, but really why Israel is not doing what it needs to do to stand up to its enemy. And I think what she would want is that everybody should fight for our rights against the coercion of this everything that was happening. I would tell her about this minuscule virus that they've used to control our lives, to keep us locked away, to do everything that's against Judaism. And now they're keeping people out of the country, and also people who want to make Aliyah. They're having such difficulties. And that was her major fight, was for Jews to get out of the galut and come
out of
when
the
they
exile.
Still can. Sorry?
Yeah, I just translated galut as the exile, to leave the exile
Yes.
and come home.
Correct. So it was for the Jews to get out of the exile, and now more than ever, screaming out to the world, we've got to help them get here, because the Israeli government is doing everything in their power to make it almost impossible. People tell me that they're waiting 6 months and they're filing papers asking them the most ridiculous questions, going back 50 years, 100 years, who their ancestors were. So this goes against humanity. It goes against our Jewish heritage. It goes against everything we stand for.
It goes against also all of these Jews who think that they can make Aliyah whenever they want, that the world will wait for them. And the doors may be closing, the gates may be closing, and history doesn't wait for people. You either make the train or you miss the train. And it's unfortunate, but that's the way it is. Well, we have to, start to say goodbye. Any last sentence you want to leave us with, Karen?
Well, I would just want to, show my gratitude in every way, shape, or form to everything that I learned from this wonderful woman, Shifra. She should have an aliyah to the highest place in heaven. And there must have been a real celebration when she entered the world of truth with her son, her husband, Rabbi Meir Kahana, Baruch Goldstein, all those people out there that she was close to, that loved her and she loved them.
I was thinking the same thing, Karen. I was thinking the exact same thing as you're saying. Thank you so much for coming on the program and sharing some of the story of Shifra. God bless you, and God bless Shifra Hoffman, her soul. As you said, may she rest in peace. May her mission in this world have an impact on all of us who are still here. Thank you for being with us, everyone.
Amen. Thank you for everything. Bye-bye.
Israel News Talk Radio's chat room. Just click the orange button at the top of the IsraelNewsTalkRadio.home page, log in as yourself or an anonymous guest, and join in on the fun. You'll meet other listeners from all over the world who listen to Israel News Talk Radio, and you can make new friends. Israel News Talk Radio's chat room. It's the closest you can get to being in the studio with us.
We love listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
Where can you get the inside news on Israel? At Israel News Talk Radio, we're dedicated to sharing Israel's inside story with the world by providing our listeners with news on Israeli politics, current affairs, and Israeli Jewish culture. The Israel News Talk Radio homepage also provides you, the listener, with useful information at your fingertips, with scrolling news headlines, weather, currency exchange, Shabbat candlelighting times, and so much more. Our radio programming is always accessible and on demand. We operate absolutely free of charge for everyone, everywhere. If you love what we do, partner with us now by becoming an Israel News Talk Radio supporter. With your support, you'll be inscribed on our Israel News Talk Radio Wall of Fame. There's nothing like us in the world. Be part of something great. Israel News Talk Radio. Straight talk from Israel.
If you love Israel News Talk Radio, then you'll love our Facebook page. We keep you up to date on what's happening in Israel, plus little surprise treasures that we don't share on the radio. Go now to follow us on Facebook. Just look for the Israel News Talk Radio Facebook page, and don't forget to subscribe and follow us by clicking on the like button. We post great stuff there that you'll want to share. Israel News Talk Radio on Facebook and Israel News Radio on Twitter.
News, opinion, and more. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.